It started with a $40,000 down payment gift. 2 years later, I was funding an $85,000 annual lifestyle for people who saw me as an ATM with a pulse, and the transformation from grateful requests to entitled demands happened so gradually that I didn't recognize the exploitation until it was choking the life out of my independence. Before I became the 70-year-old woman who froze $18 million in assets overnight, leaving my son's family scrambling to understand why their credit card stopped working, I was Dorothy Mitchell, the young widow who turned a $10,000 inheritance into one of the most successful wealth management empires in the upper Midwest. The story of Dorothy's financial empire begins with devastating loss. At just 35 years old, her husband Paul died in a car accident, leaving her with a 3-year-old son Michael and a determination that would reshape her entire life. I made myself a promise standing at Paul's graveside, Dorothy recalls. I would never be financially vulnerable again. I would never depend on anyone else for my family's security. Armed with nothing but a finance degree from the University of Minnesota and a $10,000 inheritance from her grandmother, Dorothy made a decision that would prove prophetic. My first client was myself, she explains. I took that inheritance and applied every principle I'd learned about strategic investing. Within 18 months, through careful stock selections and bond investments, she had transformed that $10,000 into $50,000. A 400% return that caught the attention of everyone around her. Word spread quickly through Dorothy's church and neighborhood about the young widow with an apparent gift for making money grow. What began as informal financial guidance for friends evolved into something much larger. People started asking for advice, then asking me to manage small amounts for them. Dorothy remembers. I realized I had found my calling. Not just surviving Paul's death, but thriving despite it. This informal consulting practice grew into a registered investment advisory firm, which eventually became Mitchell Financial Services, managing over $800 million in client assets by the time Dorothy reached 60. Hey beautiful soul. Before we dive in, show some love with a like, tap subscribe and tell me, where in this big beautiful world are you watching from? The investment that truly changed Dorothy's trajectory came in 1987. A commercial real estate deal in downtown Minneapolis. While her partners focused on immediate rental income, Dorothy saw the bigger picture. I could see the entire downtown area was going to revitalize over the next decade, she explains. I was willing to wait for that vision to pay off. Her patience proved golden. The building they purchased for $1.2 million was worth $4.8 million by 1995, with Dorothy's share funding her next 3 major investments. Dorothy's success wasn't built on luck. It was built on knowledge and strategic patience. She diversified into rental properties in upscale Minneapolis suburbs, invested early in a software startup that Microsoft would eventually acquire for a 4,800% return, and positioned herself in medical device companies that would make Minneapolis a global healthcare innovation hub. The software company investment alone returned 48 times my initial investment, Dorothy notes. But it was the medical device investments that really built generational wealth. They multiplied 20-fold as Minneapolis became the Silicon Valley of healthcare. By her 70th birthday, Dorothy's net worth had reached $18 million, not including her company's value or various trusts. Her monthly passive income of $85,000 exceeded most people's annual salaries, flowing automatically from dividends, $28,000, rental income, $31,000, bond interest, $15,000, and business partnerships, $11,000. She owned a $2.3 million penthouse overlooking the Mississippi River with floor-to-ceiling windows and wraparound terraces, plus a $1.8 million lake house on Gull Lake with 200 feet of private shoreline. Complete with a custom-built log home and vintage Chris Craft speedboat she had restored herself. But perhaps Dorothy's most valuable asset wasn't money, it was knowledge. 38 years of managing investments had taught me how money really works, she explains. I understood trusts, estate planning, tax optimization, and most importantly, asset protection strategies. I knew how to create financial arrangements that looked generous on the surface, but contained protections that would activate if recipients became ungrateful or abusive. She had dealt with every type of financial predator, family manipulator, and wealth-seeking opportunist during her decades in business. She knew the warning signs, understood the tactics, and had both the resources and knowledge to protect herself when necessary. As Dorothy built her empire, she had no idea that her greatest test wouldn't come from market crashes or economic downturns. It would come from the very family she was working so hard to protect and provide for. The woman who had dealt with every type of financial predator in business was about to discover that the most dangerous predators were already sitting at her dinner table, and that her generous heart would be used as a weapon against her own independence and dignity. It started with a $40,000 down payment gift. 2 years later, I was funding an $85,000 annual lifestyle for people who saw me as an ATM with a pulse. The transformation from grateful requests to entitled demands happened so gradually that I didn't recognize the exploitation until it was choking the life out of my independence. Michael had always been what educators politely call motivationally challenged. Even as a child, he was bright and charming but struggled with any activity that required sustained effort or delayed gratification. He was the kid who would spend weeks planning elaborate ventures, neighborhood newspapers that lasted one issue, lawn care services that ended when he realized grass grows back, elaborate garage sales that left our basement full of inventory he couldn't sell. I admired his creativity and entrepreneurial thinking, even when most of his ventures ended in chaos or boredom. This pattern intensified through high school and college. He would become passionate about activities like photography, drama club, or debate team, but would quit whenever the commitment level increased or when he wasn't immediately successful. His room became a museum of abandoned hobbies, expensive camera gear from his photography phase, musical instruments from his brief interest in band, art supplies from his month-long painting obsession. I funded these explorations because I believe finding your passion requires experimentation and because I could easily afford to give him opportunities one hadn't had growing up. When Michael attended the University of Minnesota, it was primarily because I insisted and covered all expenses. He started as a business major, switched to communications, tried computer science, experimented with art history, and finally graduated after 6 years with a general studies degree that represented more persistence than passion. After graduation, he moved back home and spent 3 years working a series of entry-level positions that he would abandon whenever the work became routine or demanding. Each job loss was explained by circumstances beyond his control, unreasonable customers, unsupportive management, or workplaces that didn't appreciate innovative thinking. When Michael met Rebecca at age 28, I was hopeful that marriage might provide the external motivation and structure he seemed to need. Rebecca was 25, had graduated from nursing school with honors, and had been working at Minneapolis General Hospital for 3 years. She seemed responsible, practical, and genuinely fond of Michael despite his limited career prospects and inconsistent work history. She came from a middle-class family where her father was a high school principal and her mother was a part-time bookkeeper. She understood the value of hard work and financial responsibility in ways that Michael had never been forced to learn. During their engagement, Rebecca seemed to have a positive influence on Michael's decision-making and follow-through. She encouraged him to stick with his customer service job longer than usual, helped him create budgets and financial goals, and suggested practical compromises when his entrepreneurial dreams exceeded his resources. I was impressed by her influence and grateful that someone other than me would be encouraging him toward responsibility and self-sufficiency. I paid for their wedding, a $35,000 celebration at the Guthrie Theater that Rebecca had dreamed of since childhood. The venue overlooked the Mississippi River with 150 guests. A 7-course dinner prepared by the theater's executive chef, open bar with premium liquors, live jazz quartet, and floral arrangements that transformed the space into something worthy of a magazine spread. I was happy to fund their dream wedding because I could easily afford it, because I wanted to welcome Rebecca into our family with generosity, and because I hoped this investment in their happiness would contribute to a successful marriage. When they started house hunting 6 months later, I provided the $40,000 down payment as a wedding gift. The house was a modest 4-bedroom colonial in Minnetonka, a suburb with excellent schools and a family-friendly community. Rebecca was earning $65,000 annually as a hospital nurse, and Michael had found relatively stable employment as a property manager earning $48,000 annually. Together, their $113,000 household income was sufficient to support their mortgage, living expenses, and modest lifestyle, especially with the boost my down payment had provided. For the first year of their marriage, this arrangement seemed to work perfectly. Michael was more consistent about work when he had mortgage payments and household responsibilities. Rebecca managed their finances carefully and seemed to be building the stable family life she had always wanted. I enjoyed being a generous mother-in-law who could provide opportunities and security without creating dependency. I thought I was witnessing the successful maturation of my son and the beginning of a financially responsible family unit. What I was actually witnessing was the calm before a storm of escalating demands and expectations that would gradually transform my generous support into systematic exploitation, teaching me the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being generous and being a fool. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to control my entire life, one concern at a time. What started as caring suggestions about my well-being became a sophisticated campaign to isolate me from anyone who might help me recognize what was really happening to my independence. The isolation campaign began subtly and was always presented as concern for my well-being rather than control over my activities and relationships. My weekly bridge games with longtime friends became stressful and too demanding for someone my age. "Dorothy, we've noticed you seem tired after your bridge nights," Rebecca would observe with manufactured concern. Maybe it would be better to reduce those commitments and focus on activities that are more relaxing. My involvement in charitable board meetings was too much responsibility and potentially overwhelming given my age and the complexity of modern nonprofit management. Michael would chime in supportively, "Mom, you've done so much for these organizations over the years. Maybe it's time to step back and let younger people handle the administrative burdens." My consulting work with former clients who still sought my financial advice became unnecessary stress that I should eliminate to enjoy retirement properly. Rebecca would explain with patronizing kindness, "Dorothy, you've already achieved everything you need to achieve professionally. Why continue working when you could be spending time with family?" Each suggestion seemed reasonable individually and was presented as caring advice rather than controlling behavior, but collectively they were systematically reducing my contact with people who knew me well, respected my expertise, and might have provided outside perspectives on the family dynamics that were developing. When my longtime friend Margaret Anderson called to express concern about my reduced social activity, her words planted a seed of awareness that would grow over the following months. "Dorothy, that doesn't sound like you at all," she said when I explained that Michael and Rebecca were concerned about me overcommitting to social obligations. "You've always been one of the most socially active and engaged people I know. Are you sure your family's concerns are about your well-being? Or are they about controlling your time and attention?" At the time, I dismissed her concern as misunderstanding the natural evolution of family relationships, but her question lingered in my mind. The manipulation escalated to manufactured health concerns designed to justify increased control over my activities and decisions. Despite being in excellent health for a 70-year-old with no chronic conditions, regular medications, or concerning symptoms from my annual physical examinations, Michael and Rebecca began expressing worries about my well-being that were used to limit my independence. Any sign of normal fatigue, temporary forgetfulness, or minor physical discomfort was seized upon as evidence that I needed more supervision and assistance. When I mentioned having a headache, it became proof that I was under too much stress. When I forgot where I put my reading glasses, it was a sign of concerning cognitive changes. When I felt tired after a long day, it demonstrated that I was overexerting myself. "Dorothy, managing all those investment accounts must be exhausting," Rebecca would say with apparent sympathy. "Maybe it would be less stressful to consolidate some of those responsibilities with a family member who could handle the day-to-day monitoring." The health concern manipulation reached its peak when I mentioned experiencing some back pain after spending a day working in my garden at the lake house. "Dorothy, back pain can be very serious at your age," Rebecca said with alarm that seemed disproportionate to the minor discomfort I had described. "You could have herniated a disc or developed compression fractures." Within 24 hours, they had scheduled medical appointments, research orthopedic specialists, and begun discussing practical solutions for reducing my physical responsibilities that would coincidentally increase their control over my property and activities. Most insidiously, they began monitoring and controlling my communications with existing advisors and friends. Phone calls from my financial advisor would be answered by Rebecca, who would explain that I was resting or busy with family activities and offered to take messages that were never reliably delivered. Invitations to social events and professional gatherings would be filtered through Michael and Rebecca, who would help me manage my calendar by declining commitments they deemed too stressful. Mail from financial institutions and investment companies would be collected by Rebecca under the guise of helping organize important documents, but she was actually controlling my access to information about my own accounts and assets. We just want to protect you from unnecessary stress and make sure you're not being pressured by people who don't understand your family's situation, Rebecca would explain when I questioned these interventions. But what was actually happening was that I was being systematically cut off from professional advisors, longtime friends, and information sources that might have helped me recognize the manipulation and exploitation that was escalating around me, creating a bubble of family-controlled information that made it nearly impossible to maintain perspective on what was really happening to my life. When Michael quit his stable job to chase real estate dreams, I thought I was investing in his future. I was actually funding my own captivity, and what looked like supporting his entrepreneurial spirit was really financing the blueprint for my eventual imprisonment. 2 years after the twins started at St. Catherine's Academy, Michael decided that property management wasn't fulfilling his entrepreneurial potential and that he needed to transition to a career that would allow for unlimited income growth and creative autonomy. His chosen path was real estate sales, which he was convinced would allow him to build a business rather than just work a job and eventually achieve the financial success that had eluded him in previous employment. "Mom, I've been thinking about this for months," Michael explained during one of our weekly coffee meetings, his enthusiasm infectious but his planning questionable. "Property management is steady, but it's never going to provide the kind of income that allows Rebecca to stay home with the kids full-time or gives us the flexibility to really build wealth for our family's future." The decision to leave stable employment for commission-based real estate sales would have been risky under any circumstances, but it was particularly challenging given their financial obligations and Rebecca's part-time income status. What Michael didn't mention, but what I would soon discover, was that real estate sales require substantial upfront investment in licensing, training, marketing materials, and living expenses during the initial period when new agents are building their client base and learning the business. New agents typically earn very little during their first year, and many fail to achieve sustainable income levels even after several years in the industry. "I know there's some financial risk during the transition period," Michael continued with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced real financial consequences. "But I've been talking to successful agents, and the income potential is really unlimited for someone willing to work hard and build relationships." Rebecca jumped in with their carefully orchestrated pitch. "We were hoping you might be able to help us through the transition period, just until Michael gets established and starts earning consistent commissions." The transition period they were requesting support for turned out to be 18 months and approximately $45,000 in total costs. Real estate licensing courses and examination fees consumed the first chunk. Then came the professional wardrobe suitable for meeting with clients and attending business events, because as Rebecca explained, first impressions are everything in real estate, and Michael needs to look successful to attract successful clients. Marketing materials followed, business cards, brochures, and advertising expenses that seemed to multiply monthly. The vehicle lease for a car that would make an appropriate impression on potential clients became another ongoing expense because Michael's reliable but modest sedan apparently didn't project the right image for someone selling luxury homes. Most significantly, there were the living expenses to replace Michael's property management salary during the months when his real estate income was minimal. "It's really an investment in our family's future earning potential," Michael explained when I questioned the scope of the financial support they were requesting, using language that made their dependents sound like a business opportunity. "Once I'm established, I'll be earning significantly more than I ever could in property management, and we'll be able to start paying you back and building real financial independence." The payback promise was vague and open-ended, with no specific timeline or amount discussed. The focus was entirely on the investment potential and the temporary nature of the support rather than on concrete plans for repayment or realistic projections of Michael's likely earnings in real estate. I agreed to fund Michael's career transition because I believed in supporting family members who were trying to improve their financial situation, because I wanted him to find career satisfaction and success, and because I hoped that higher earnings would eventually reduce their dependence on my financial support. What actually happened was that Michael's real estate career generated minimal income while requiring ongoing expenses for continuing education, marketing, and business development. After 18 months, he was earning approximately $35,000 annually from real estate sales, less than his previous property management salary and far less than the unlimited income potential he had projected. But instead of acknowledging that the career change had been financially unsuccessful, Michael and Rebecca reframed his modest earnings as building toward future success and continued to rely on my financial support to bridge the gap between their expenses and their actual income. Meanwhile, the twins had begun to absorb their parents' attitudes about my role as family financier, making requests that sounded more like announcements of need. "Grandma Dorothy, I need new dance shoes for my recital," Emma would declare, not as a request but as a statement requiring immediate action. "The ones I have don't match my costume, and everyone else in my class has the professional grade shoes that cost $200. The career change had actually increased their dependence on my funding rather than reducing it, but it had been presented and accepted as a temporary investment in their family's financial independence. The PowerPoint presentation Rebecca prepared wasn't about family financial planning, it was a hostile takeover disguised as optimization. She had transformed our dining room into a corporate boardroom to discuss our family's financial future, complete with spreadsheets that calculated exactly how much of my money they thought they deserved permanent access to. The second year of what I now recognize as systematic financial exploitation began with what Rebecca called a family financial optimization meeting. She had prepared spreadsheets, printed articles about multi-generational wealth management, and arranged the dining room table like she was presenting to a board of directors. "Dorothy, we've been thinking about how we can be more strategic about our financial planning," Rebecca began, her laptop open to a PowerPoint presentation she had clearly spent considerable time preparing. "Right now, we're handling expenses in a somewhat random way, and we think there might be more efficient approaches that benefit everyone." The presentation was impressive in its thoroughness and manipulative in its implications. Rebecca had calculated my annual contributions to their family, $85,000 in direct support plus various gifts, emergency assistance, and special expenses, and had created projections showing how that money could be optimized through different financial structures and tax strategies. "For instance," she continued, clicking through slides that looked professionally designed, "instead of you paying the twins' tuition directly, we could set up educational trusts that provide tax advantages and create more formal structures for their college planning." Michael jumped in with enthusiasm that seemed genuine but felt rehearsed. "Mom, what Rebecca has discovered is that we've been thinking too small about family financial planning. Instead of handling expenses year by year, we should be thinking about long-term wealth management strategies that protect everyone's interests." The optimization they were proposing involved consolidating many of my financial contributions into regular monthly transfers that would give them more predictable access to funding, while creating tax advantages that would primarily benefit their household rather than mine. "We're not asking for more money," Rebecca was careful to emphasize, though her proposal would have effectively doubled their access to my resources. "We're asking for smarter money management that makes the same contributions work more effectively for everyone." Buried in the details were concerning elements that would have transferred significant control over my financial decisions to their preferences. Joint accounts for family expenses that would give them direct access to funds without requiring my approval, automatic transfers that would make their monthly budget independent of my ongoing willingness to provide support, and financial arrangements that would make it difficult for me to reduce or eliminate my contributions without causing immediate hardship for their household. "This is really about creating financial security for the twins," Michael explained, positioning their proposal as protecting my grandchildren rather than securing their own access to my wealth. "Right now, if something happened to you or if your financial situation changed, Emma and Jacob's education and opportunities would be at risk. This structure would protect their stability regardless of future circumstances." They were presenting their proposal as protecting the twins from potential changes in my financial situation, but what they were actually requesting was protection from potential changes in my willingness to continue subsidizing their lifestyle indefinitely. At 2 a.m. and -15 degrees Fahrenheit weather, standing locked outside in my nightgown, I finally understood exactly who my son and daughter-in-law really were. The conversation that shattered my tolerance forever happened on a frigid February evening when Minneapolis was experiencing one of the worst blizzards in decades, and what I overheard in their kitchen would change everything. The evening that would destroy my family relationships forever started normally enough. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills reaching -35 degrees Fahrenheit, and the city had issued warnings for residents to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. I had been staying at Michael and Rebecca's house for 3 days because my penthouse building was experiencing heating system repairs, and they had insisted it would be safer and more comfortable for me to stay with them until the repairs were completed. What I didn't realize was that this temporary arrangement was actually a test to see how much control they could exert over my life when I was living under their roof and dependent on their hospitality. We had finished dinner, the twins were doing homework in their rooms, and I was reading in the living room while Michael and Rebecca cleaned up in the kitchen. I could hear them talking quietly, but I wasn't paying attention to their conversation until their voices became more animated and I heard my name. "She's being completely unreasonable about the estate planning," Rebecca was saying, clearly frustrated. "We've given her multiple opportunities to do the right thing for the family, and she keeps refusing to consider what's best for everyone." "I know," Michael replied, his voice carrying a tone of exasperation I had never heard him use when discussing me. "Sometimes I think she's becoming selfish in her old age. She has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes, but she acts like helping her own family is some kind of burden." I felt my stomach clench as I realized they were discussing me, as if I were a problematic obligation rather than the person who had been funding their lifestyle for the past 2 years. "And the way she questions every expense," Rebecca continued with growing venom. "Like we're trying to take advantage of her instead of just providing normal opportunities for our children. Emma and Jacob deserve the same advantages as their classmates, and Dorothy acts like we're being greedy for wanting the best for our kids." The casual dismissal of my legitimate concerns about their escalating demands revealed how completely they had reframed our relationship in their minds. "Maybe we need to be more direct about our expectations," Michael suggested, and I could hear the calculated planning in his voice. "She's going to leave us everything eventually anyway. So why is she making it so difficult to access resources that will ultimately benefit the family?" The casual assumption that they would inherit my wealth, combined with their resentment of my reluctance to give them more control over my money, revealed attitudes and expectations that shocked me to my core. Then Rebecca said the words that would haunt me forever. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to have a serious conversation about Dorothy's living situation. This house is getting crowded with all of us here. And honestly, she's becoming more demanding and difficult to manage." When Michael asked what she meant, her response chilled me to the bone. "I mean, maybe it's time for her to consider assisted living or some kind of senior community where she'd have professional care, and we wouldn't have to worry about managing her needs on top of everything else we're dealing with." My blood turned to ice as I realized they were discussing moving me into institutional care, not because I needed it, but because my presence in their lives had become inconvenient. They were planning to use fabricated health concerns to justify moving me into assisted living, where I would presumably be easier to control and where they could gain power of attorney over my financial affairs. By 9 a.m., while they were getting ready for their normal day, I had already destroyed their financial world. The emergency calls I made from my penthouse that frigid night would demonstrate to Michael and Rebecca exactly how much power they had underestimated and exactly how expensive their mistreatment of me was about to become. Standing on that frozen porch, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity that cut through 2 years of gradual manipulation and systematic exploitation. Michael and Rebecca had just demonstrated that they were willing to risk my life to maintain their control over my money. They had escalated from financial manipulation to physical intimidation, locking me outside and life-threatening, whether because I had refused to accept their ultimatum about family financial arrangements. But more importantly, they had revealed their fundamental assumption that I was powerless to resist their control, because I was financially and emotionally dependent on their relationship. I walked to my car, which was parked in their driveway, and drove back to my penthouse through the blizzard, taking the most dangerous drive of my life to escape people who had proven they were willing to risk my life for their financial advantage. I spent the rest of that night making a series of phone calls that would demonstrate exactly how wrong they were about my vulnerability and dependence. The first call was to my longtime friend and neighbor, Margaret Anderson, who I woke up at 3 a.m. to ask for immediate help. "Dorothy, are you all right? It's 3 o'clock in the morning," she said, instantly alert with concern. "Margaret, I need you to witness something for me, and I need you to do it tonight," I replied with a calm that surprised even me. "My son and daughter-in-law just locked me outside their house in sub-zero weather because I refused to give them financial control over my assets. I need a witness to document my condition and state of mind before I take action to protect myself." Margaret arrived within 30 minutes along with her daughter Linda, who was a nurse practitioner and could provide medical documentation of my condition. "Dorothy, you could have died out there," Linda said as she examined the frostbite on my fingers and documented my core body temperature. Exposure to those temperatures for extended periods can cause serious injury or death. They spent 2 hours with me taking photographs of my frostbite injuries, recording detailed statements about the evening's events, and documenting my mental clarity and decision-making capacity. The second call was to my attorney, James Harrison, who I also woke up in the middle of the night. "James, I need immediate legal action to protect myself from financial elder abuse, and I need it implemented before business hours tomorrow," I said with steely determination. After I explained the evening's events and the systematic financial exploitation that had led to this moment, his response was swift and decisive. "Dorothy, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse, financial exploitation, and potentially assault. We need to document everything and consider filing criminal charges." "I want to file civil charges and obtain restraining orders," I replied. "But first, I want to cut off their access to my financial support. I want every credit card, bank account, and automatic payment that they have access to frozen immediately." James could arrange for emergency court orders, but he warned me about the consequences. "Dorothy, you need to understand that this will create immediate hardship for their family, including your grandchildren." My response was immediate. "James, they just demonstrated that they're willing to risk my life to maintain control over my money. Their children's comfort is no longer my primary concern." The third call was to my financial advisor, Robert Chun, who I contacted in the middle of the night to arrange comprehensive financial protection. "Robert, I need emergency action on all accounts that have secondary access authorizations for my son and daughter-in-law. I want every card, account, and automatic payment frozen immediately." When he questioned the scope of the action, explaining that it would affect their mortgage payments, utility bills, and credit card payments, my response was unwavering. "That's exactly what I want. They just locked me outside in a blizzard because I wouldn't give them more control over my money. They're about to learn what happens when they lose the control they already have." By 6 a.m., I had arranged for comprehensive legal protection and complete financial cutoff of Michael and Rebecca's access to my resources. Emergency restraining orders would be served that morning, all credit cards linked to my accounts would be canceled immediately, all automatic payments for their household expenses would be stopped. All access to checking accounts and investment accounts would be revoked, and all legal authorizations giving them any role in my financial or medical affairs would be terminated. The 70-year-old woman they thought they could intimidate and control was about to show them exactly what real power looked like. 6 weeks without my money taught them more about financial reality than 6 years of my generosity ever could. The education they received when their credit cards stopped working and their bills came due was worth every uncomfortable moment of watching my family face the consequences of their own choices. At 9 a.m., while Michael and Rebecca were presumably getting the twins ready for school and preparing for their normal day, my attorney was serving them with restraining orders, and my financial advisor was canceling every form of access they had to my money. I can only imagine their confusion when their credit cards were declined at the coffee shop. Their panic when they tried to access the checking account for household expenses and discovered it had been frozen, and their desperation when they realized that every financial safety net I had provided for the past 2 years had been removed in a single morning. By noon, they were leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that documented their growing understanding of their financial situation. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with the credit cards," Michael's first message said desperately. "They're saying the accounts have been canceled, but that can't be right." Within hours, the messages escalated. "Dorothy, this is ridiculous. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're hurting Emma and Jacob more than you're hurting us," Rebecca's angry voice declared. By evening, the final message revealed the complete collapse of their financial security. "Dorothy, if you don't restore our access to those accounts immediately, we're going to have no choice but to pursue legal action for financial elder abuse. You can't use your money as a weapon against your own family." Over the following weeks, as Michael and Rebecca struggled to manage their financial obligations without access to my support, the full extent of their dependency became clear to everyone involved. They couldn't make their mortgage payment and received late notices, couldn't pay utility bills and faced disconnection warnings, couldn't fund the twins' private school tuition and received enrollment termination notices, and couldn't maintain the middle-class lifestyle they had been living with my subsidies. 6 months after that frozen February night, our family relationships had been completely restructured around mutual respect, rather than financial dependency. Rebecca had returned to full-time nursing, earning $75,000 annually. Michael had doubled his real estate income by treating it as a serious career. And together their $140,000 household income was sufficient to support a modest but comfortable lifestyle. Most importantly, the twins had learned to interact with me as a person rather than as a source of funding, asking about my business activities and showing genuine interest in my opinions and experiences. The night they locked me outside in the cold, Michael and Rebecca thought they were demonstrating their power over me. What they actually demonstrated was that I had far more power than they had ever imagined, and that I was willing to use that power to protect my dignity and independence. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are taking advantage of you is to stop enabling their exploitation and force them to develop the character and capabilities they need for genuine success and happiness.